The film begins in near darkness. A faint wash of light slowly reveals a row of fossilized skulls resting behind museum glass. Their hollow eyes reflect the glow above them. The room is silent except for a low orchestral hum, steady and reassuring. It feels official, authoritative, as if the story resting here has already been decided. Most of us know this story by heart. It unfolds like a carefully arranged ladder. A distant ancestor steps down from the trees. Another learns to walk upright. Hands free themselves from the ground and begin to shape stone. Fire is tamed. Language emerges, brains expand. The stooped figure in schoolbook illustrations gradually straightens until it becomes US, alert, modern, complete. It is a beautiful narrative, clean, upward, logical, from simplicity to sophistication, from instinct to intelligence. The path seems inevitable, almost destined. The narrator speaks calmly, guiding us through the familiar milestones. Early hominins crossing open savannas. Rough stone tools, sparks igniting dry grass. Small bands, gathering beneath widening skies. Each step appears to follow naturally from the one before it. Nothing rushed. Nothing abrupt. Just time and pressure, shaping life into awareness. But the camera does not stay only on the sweeping diagrams. It lingers on the labels beneath each fossil. Words appear beneath the glass. Estimated age. Partial remains. Incomplete specimen. The skulls themselves are fractured. A jaw without a cranium, a femur without a face. These fragments carry enormous weight, yet they are only fragments. Centuries pass in the narrative with a single sentence. Entire eras rest on a handful of bones discovered in scattered soil. The elegant ladder begins to look less solid. When you step closer, you notice the gaps between each rung. The illustrations in textbooks show smooth transitions, but the real record feels scattered, almost hesitant. A skull here, a tool there, then long stretches of silence. Vast segments of time where nothing clear speaks back to us. The story flows confidently, yet beneath it lies uncertainty that is rarely emphasized. Known of this erases evolution. The evidence for change across deep time remains overwhelming. Species adapt, forms shift, traits emerge and disappear. Yet the idea of a straight, uninterrupted ascent begins to feel like an edited version of something far more complex. What appears to be a single unfolding line is in truth a scattered archive assembled from rare survivals, bones preserved by chance. Stone resists decay. Most of what once existed leaves no trace at all, and so the timeline we trust is built not from completeness, but from what happened to endure. The museum room grows quieter as this realization settles in. The skulls no longer feel like milestones alone. They feel like survivors of a much larger story that dissolved around them. For every fossil under glass, how many vanished entirely? For every step clearly marked, how many remain invisible? The ladder still stands. It still guides our understanding, but it no longer feels finished. It feels partial, accurate, perhaps yet undeniably incomplete. And if the official map of our origins contains these stretches of silence, then the question becomes impossible to ignore. Where, exactly, does that silence begin? The museum fades, replaced by open sky and wind moving across dry African plains. The camera lowers toward an excavation site where dust clings to brushes and fragments emerge slowly from hardened earth. Layers of sediment stretch downward like thin pages pressed together by time. Each layer promises memory. Each layer withholds it. The narration becomes quieter here, almost careful. Beneath the surface, millions of years lie stacked in silence. Yet when scientists read these layers, they sometimes encounter something unexpected. Periods that should show steady change appear strangely thin. Then, without warning, a shift arrives. A skull emerges with a noticeably larger cranial capacity than those below it. Tools found in one layer appear strikingly more refined than the stones resting just inches deeper. It is not chaos, it is not contradiction, but it is not perfectly gradual either. The familiar ladder of evolution begins to look less like a smooth climb and more like a branching tree. Names surface from research papers and cave chambers: Homo naledi, with its unusual blend of ancient and advanced traits. Denisovans, known at first only from a fragment of bone, yet leaving genetic traces in living populations. Branches extend outward, overlap, then vanish. Some lineages coexist with early Homo sapiens. Others end abruptly, leaving no clear descendants. The record does not resemble a straight path toward inevitability. It resembles a thicket, dense and tangled, where multiple experiments unfold at once. Then there is intelligence itself. Controlled fire appears in specific regions, then seems absent elsewhere for long spans. Symbolic markings show up in one cave system, but not consistently across continents. Sophisticated tools emerge in bursts, not in a perfectly even progression. Social coordination intensifies, then quiets. If change were purely steady, each layer would reveal small, predictable increments. Instead, there are moments where something accelerates, where the pattern tightens and complexity surges forward. It does not look like a staircase. It feels more like a pulse. The word lingers as the camera shifts from cave walls to scattered bones to open terrain, stretching beneath a pale horizon. A pulse rises, then recedes. A surge appears, then stabilizes. The pattern repeats. Perhaps this is simply how evolution works. Periods of relative calm, interrupted by rapid adaptation when pressure mounts. Yet when intelligence is the trait accelerating, the effect feels different. Awareness seems to sharpen in concentrated bursts. Textbooks often compress these shifts into neat paragraphs. A diagram smooths out irregularity. But beneath those smooth lines, the fossil archive tells a subtler story. Something does not climb neatly rung by rung. It gathers, holds tension, then advances more quickly than expected. And when intelligence appears to leap rather than crawl, a new question forms almost without effort. If evolution did not move upwards step by step, but instead advanced in sudden waves, what drove those waves? What changed in the environment or in the body to trigger such acceleration? Why do certain periods feel almost empty, only to be followed by bursts of unexpected complexity? The excavation sites grow quiet again. Wind brushes the edges of exposed trenches. Each fragment uncovered answers something, while deepening another mystery. The ladder we once trusted has dissolved into branching paths and rhythmic surges. The timeline still holds, but it no longer feels steady. If intelligence rises in pulses, then somewhere within those intervals lies a force strong enough to compress time and sharpen minds. And that force is where the deeper silence begins. The warmth of open savannas fades into cold light. Ice spreads across continents in slow, relentless sheets. Wind moves over frozen ground where forests once stood. The sky darkens beneath ash, drifting from distant eruptions. The earth does not appear welcoming. It appears strained. Early human groups move through this unstable world with small numbers and limited tools. Food sources shrink. Rivers shift course. Drought lingers longer than memory. Logic suggests such pressures should weaken fragile populations. Scarcity rarely nourishes complexity. Survival, when resources thin, tends to narrow focus to the immediate moment. Yet something unexpected unfolds within these harsh intervals. Instead of cognitive stagnation, signs of cooperation deepen. Evidence points to coordinated hunting strategies, requiring foresight and shared planning. Brain regions associated with memory and anticipation expand over time. Symbolic gestures, though rare and fragile in the archaeological record, begin to surface. It is as if threat compresses attention, forcing the mind to stretch forward in time. The camera lingers on a small cluster of figures, huddled near a fire, under cold stars. Fire itself becomes more than warmth. It becomes a gathering point, a place where language might refine and stories might form. Crisis draws bodies closer, closeness draws communication outward. Genetic studies reveal moments when human populations narrow to startlingly small numbers. These bottlenecks appear not as brief interruptions, but as extended constrictions. Diversity shrinks, variations disappear. Only certain lineages persist. From a distance, such compression looks catastrophic. A species reduced to a thin thread, Yet from that thread, continuity continues. During these compressions, survival depends not only on strength but on adaptability. Groups that communicate efficiently, anticipate seasonal change, and share resources stand better odds. The mind becomes an instrument sharpened by necessity. The image of evolution, as a gentle climb through favorable conditions, begins to soften. Perhaps comfort does not produce sharp advancement. Perhaps it sustains. But crisis may refine. Ice advances. Ice retreats. Volcanic winters blanket land, then skies clear again. Each cycle pressures fragile communities. Each cycle removes those less suited to adapt. What remains carries traits forged under threat. Why did intelligence deepen during eras when every calorie demanded effort? Why did symbolic behavior flicker into existence when survival alone should have consumed attention? Stress did not merely damage the trajectory of awareness. It may have accelerated it. Intelligence, then, might not be a smooth inheritance passed gently forward through stable generations. It may be something reforged repeatedly in moments when collapse loomed near, a blade tempered in fire rather than shaped in comfort. The thought carries quiet weight. If cognitive advancement sharpens under existential pressure, then bottlenecks are not simply tragedies. They are filters. They compress populations until only particular variations endure. Those variations become the foundation for the next expansion. The glaciers do not feel symbolic. They are indifferent forces. Yet within their shadow, small bands of humans endure and adapt. The timeline does not show a single uninterrupted ascent. It reveals compressions, followed by resurgence, narrowing, followed by renewal. And here, beneath the cold sky, a possibility forms that is difficult to ignore. Perhaps humanity did not rise once and continue steadily upward. Perhaps it endured multiple constrictions that reshaped its path. Perhaps intelligence itself was tested, thinned, and rekindled more than we realize. If crisis can reshape cognition so profoundly, then the question waiting ahead grows heavier. How many times has humanity stood at the edge of disappearance? And how many chapters dissolved when it did? The camera rises over a quiet volcanic caldera. Its slopes are green now, almost peaceful, softened by time. There is no visible fury, no smoke twisting into the sky. Yet beneath that calm surface lies the memory of fire, powerful enough to dim the world. 74,000 years ago, this mountain did not rest. It tore open. The eruption known today as tuba sent ash high into the stratosphere, spreading a grey veil across continents. Sunlight thinned, temperatures fell, forests withered, rivers slowed. In some regions, seasons no longer followed familiar patterns. The planet seemed to hesitate. The reconstruction unfolds slowly. Ash drifts across distant plains. Herds struggle to find grazing land beneath powder, thick ground. Small human groups, already living on the edge of survival, face a world that has suddenly tightened around them. The narration speaks gently, almost in a whisper. Geneticists studying mitochondrial DNA have traced the threads of maternal ancestry back through time. They have found something startling. Around the period of Toba, human genetic diversity narrows sharply, as if the population passed through an impossibly small corridor. Estimates suggest that humanity may have been reduced to only a few thousand breeding individuals. Pause with that number. A few thousand. If so few survived, then the vast majority of humanity. Their faces, their voices, their habits, gone. No, absorbed. No, transformed. Erased. But the story does not settle on a single catastrophe. Researchers point to other climatic upheavals long before and long after Toba, severe drought cycles across Africa, glacial periods that locked water into ice sheets, lowering sea levels while reshaping ecosystems, interglacial warmth that later reversed into freezing advance. Each shift altered habitats rapidly. Each shift pressured populations that were never large to begin with. When geneticists look deeper into ancient DNA patterns, they see signs of constrictions at multiple points across deep time. Diversity tightens. Then, gradually, it expands again from a smaller base. It is not the signature of steady growth. It is the signature of survival after compression. Imagine entire groups scattered across plains and coastlines, some thriving in brief stability, others dwindling when rain fails or cold deepens. A migration succeeds here, collapses there. A lineage persists for thousands of years, then disappears without leaving descendants. Most of those losses left no fossil record. Bones decay. Camps dissolve. Landscapes shift. Modern humans are often described as the result of a long upward climb, but another description feels just as accurate. We are the descendants of those who endured narrow escapes. How many versions of humanity flourished briefly and faded? How many adaptations, gestures, or social patterns existed for a time, only to be cut short by famine or ash-darkened skies? The fossil record holds fragments. The genetic record holds shadows. Between them lies a vast silence. Standing above the quiet volcano, it becomes clear that survival has never been guaranteed. Our species is not the uninterrupted outcome of smooth progress. It is the outcome of bottlenecks survived. And if entire populations were compressed into tiny numbers, if diversity vanished in waves, then a question lingers heavier than ash in the air. What else disappeared in those narrow corridors? Beyond genes alone, the tide pulls back from a modern shoreline, revealing wet sand that glistens under a pale sky. Waves retreat in slow rhythm, as though the ocean itself is breathing. Then the water dissolves into transparency, and a digital overlay lowers the sea by more than 100 meters. What was once coastline expands outward into vast plains. Rivers stretch farther. Land appears where water now rests. During the last ice age, much of the world looked different. Water locked inside massive glaciers lowered sea levels dramatically. Regions now submerged were once habitable corridors, rich with life. Doggerland connected Britain to mainland Europe. Sunderland fused islands of Southeast Asia into a single, expansive territory. The basin of the Persian Gulf likely formed a fertile valley, fed by ancient rivers. These were not empty landscapes. They would have drawn animals, and where animals gathered, humans followed. Yet when we search for early settlements, we mostly dig on dry land. Archaeology depends on access. It depends on terrain that has not been swallowed. Coastlines have always been attractive to humans. Predictable food sources, transport routes, mild climates. But coastlines are also fragile. When ice melts and seas rise, they vanish first. The camera drifts across an underwater plain, murky and still. Beneath layers of sediment may rest hearths long extinguished, camps once busy with movement, footprints pressed into soil that hardened before submersion. If early populations developed behaviors along these drowned shores, their traces would now lie out of reach. Even on land, preservation plays favorites. Stone survives. Bone survives when conditions allow. But wood structures rot. Fiber baskets unravel. Animal hides decay. Spoken language, perhaps the most transformative human invention. Most daily life evaporates without residue. What we call prehistory is shaped not only by what happened, but by what endured. A polished stone blade speaks across millennia. A woven net vanishes. A carved symbol in wood dissolves long before sediment can protect it. The record we hold is curated by durability, not necessarily by importance. This does not require imagining lost empires of towering architecture. Complexity can exist without monuments. Small coastal communities could have refined navigation, developed symbolic traditions, shared stories beneath open skies, and left little for us to find once tides rose. The absence of evidence begins to look different when viewed this way. It may not signal emptiness. It may signal inaccessibility. Entire chapters of early human adaptation may rest beneath modern seas, hidden not by secrecy but by geography. The camera rises from the submerged plain and returns to the present shoreline. Waves continue their quiet motion, indifferent to what lies beneath. It becomes clear that our understanding of deep history is shaped by what we can reach. If large stretches of habitable land are now underwater, if tools of wood and fibre dissolved without trace, then the story preserved on dry ground represents only part of a wider canvas. And if these drowned landscapes shaped early human life in ways we can barely glimpse, then a deeper question emerges from beneath the tide. Who were the minds that once walked those vanished shores? The camera moves inward, away from open plains and submerged coastlines, into the cool darkness of a cave. Torchlight flickers against stone, casting moving shadows across walls, marked by hands long gone. Animals stretch across the rock in ochre and charcoal, horses in motion, bison with lowered heads, deer caught in mid-step. The air feels still, almost watchful. Here, survival seems to shift into something else. A sharpened stone tool extends life by cutting flesh and shaping wood. But a painted animal serves no immediate hunger. A carved bone flute does not protect against cold. Yet these objects appear in the archaeological record, with startling presence around 40,000 years ago. Beads crafted from shells, buried with care beside human remains. Bodies positioned deliberately in graves, sprinkled with pigment. Something beyond necessity begins to breathe. Researchers often describe this period as a cognitive revolution, a moment when symbolic thoughts surged forward. Language may have matured. Abstract ideas took form. Humans did not merely respond to their environment. They represented it. They imagined it. It is an elegant explanation, a turning point, a clear ignition. But when the camera lingers longer in the cave's dim light, the timeline becomes less certain. Engraved ochre pieces in southern Africa date back much further. Possible symbolic artifacts appear scattered in layers older than 40,000 years. They are rare, fragmentary, debated. Yet they exist. Was this truly a sudden awakening, or was it a rekindling of something that flickered before? Burial sites offer quiet clues. Some early graves reveal bodies treated with care long before the supposed revolution. The dead were not simply discarded. They were arranged, adorned, remembered. Such gestures imply imagination, the ability to think beyond immediate sight. The question grows heavier in the cave's hush. If symbolic thought appeared earlier in faint traces, then disappeared from the record for long stretches, what caused its retreat? Did populations shrink so drastically that creative traditions dissolved with them? When a bottleneck reduces a species to a few thousand individuals, how many ideas vanish along with the majority? Symbolic intelligence may not have ignited once and burned continuously. It may have flared, dimmed, then flared again, each bottleneck acting as both filter and extinguishing wind. Surviving groups carried fragments forward. Sometimes those fragments were ignited. Sometimes they did not. In this light, the paintings feel less like the birth of consciousness and more like evidence that it endured long enough to stabilize. Perhaps earlier awakenings never reached critical mass. Perhaps communities that first experimented with abstraction vanished before their traditions could root deeply. The notion does not deny the extraordinary nature of the cave art. It deepens it. These walls may represent the first uninterrupted continuity of symbolic culture, not the first spark. What if consciousness has awakened before, under older skies, in smaller circles of firelight? What if songs were sung that left no echo, stories told that dissolved with the last voice that remembered them? The fossil record preserves bone and stone with uneven mercy. Thought itself leaves only faint impressions. The torchlight trembles as if stirred by breath. The cave feels both ancient and fragile. Humanity's narrative may not be a single ignition point, but a sequence of sparks, most of which faded too quickly to leave more than traces. And if consciousness may have risen and receded before, then the mystery deepens beyond artifacts. Do echoes of those earlier awakenings still rest within us, hidden in our genes, carried in our myths, or buried beneath landscapes we have yet to uncover? The scene shifts from windswept plains and submerged coasts to a quiet laboratory washed in soft blue light. A strand of DNA rotates slowly on a screen, delicate and precise, coiled like an ancient script written in a language only recently understood. The camera moves closer, as if descending into something invisible yet vast. Evolution is no longer a skull under glass or a stone tool beneath soil. It is code, folded inside every living cell. For generations, the story of human origins focused on bones and artifacts. No, it moves inward. Genetic sequencing has revealed something both subtle. Modern humans are not the product of a single, isolated lineage. Within our DNA are fragments from other human groups once believed separate and extinct. Neanderthal sequences appear in many populations outside Africa. Denisovan fragments surface most strongly in parts of Asia and Oceania. These were not distant curiosities, they were encounters. Long ago, early Homo sapiens met other human forms on overlapping landscapes. They did not remain separate. They mixed. They shared more than territory. They shared biology. Those species eventually disappeared as distinct groups, yet parts of them endured, hidden inside us. The narration moves gently here, avoiding technical language. It speaks of interwoven lines rather than replacement. Entire branches of humanity faded from the surface of the earth, but threads of their existence continue to shape immune systems, skin adaptation, even altitude tolerance in certain regions. The genome carries quiet souvenirs of meetings that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. This discovery reshapes the familiar ladder yet again. Humanity is not a clean ascent from one form into another. It is a convergence, a blending of paths that briefly crossed before some lines dissolved entirely. Modern humans are mosaics, assembled from survivors who met and merged. The idea feels intimate, no, theoretical, personal. Within your own cells may rest fragments of beings who walk through cold European valleys or high Asian plateaus under skies utterly different from ours. Their faces are gone, their cultures vanished, yet faint segments of their code persist. Replicated each time, life continues. But another thought follows quietly behind. We can detect Neanderthal DNA because those encounters left descendants. We can trace Denisovan fragments because their lineage intersected with ours. But what of human variations that never interbred with surviving populations? What of branches that ended completely, leaving no genetic imprint in modern descendants? The genome is an archive, but it is also a graveyard. It preserves only the lines that continued. Countless others may have existed briefly and vanished without merging into the continuity that reached us. What if entire populations flourished in isolation, developed unique traits, perhaps even distinct cognitive patterns, and then disappeared before crossing paths with the lineage that became dominant? Their stories would leave no echo in our chromosomes. They would be erased not only from land, but from inheritance. The rotating strand of DNA feels less like a complete record, and more like a narrow corridor through which survival passed. We see only what endured. Modern humanity is not a singular inheritance traced cleanly through time. It is a layered composition shaped by convergence, loss, and survival. Each living person is a small archive of ancient meetings. And if echoes of vanished humans remain in our cells, then the question deepens naturally. Are there genetic events buried in this code that we have not yet learned how to read? The blue glow of the laboratory screen deepens as the strand of DNA slows, magnified further until its spirals become patterns of light and shadow. Within these patterns, scientists have learned to read variation, the subtle differences passed from parent to child across uncounted generations. Diversity is not random. It carries history. When populations are large and stable, variation expands. When they shrink, variation tightens. By comparing genetic differences between modern humans across continents, researchers can estimate how many ancestors once carried those lines forward. It is an indirect method, yet remarkably consistent. The genome holds not only traces of who we met, but how many of us endured. And in that record appears something startling. At certain points deep in time, genetic diversity contracts sharply. It is as if humanity passed through an impossibly narrow corridor. Thousands of lines that once existed vanish, leaving only a small cluster to continue. The image that forms is not of gradual growth, but of compression. Most people are familiar with one such event, linked to volcanic winter, but beyond that moment lie deeper compressions, more ancient and less understood. Some studies suggest that hundreds of thousands of years ago, ancestral human populations may have declined to extremely small breeding groups for extended periods. No, for seasons or even decades, but for spans of time long enough to reshape genetic structure itself. The imagery shifts from the laboratory to an open plain under a vast night sky. A few small fires flicker in the distance. The land feels enormous. The humans beside those fires feel few. If the data is accurate, there were times when our lineage hovered near disappearance far earlier than commonly imagined. Diversity narrows in a way that suggests prolonged limitation, not a sudden catastrophe, followed by quick recovery. Something reduced numbers and kept them low. Yet geology does not always offer a clear event to match these compressions. No singular eruption neatly aligns with each contraction. No definitive impact crater explains every narrowing. The pattern stretches across intervals, too broad for simple answers. Why does our DNA remember a silence that geology barely records? It is not necessary to imagine unknown disasters to feel the weight of this question. Climate fluctuated dramatically. Drought cycles stretched habitats thin. Competition with other hominin species may have pressured resources. Migration corridors closed unexpectedly as ice advanced. The Earth itself has rarely been stable for long, and still, survival continued. What sustained these small populations for such extended periods at the brink? How did they avoid complete collapse when diversity reached such fragile levels? Even a modest disease outbreak or extended famine could have extinguished them. The bottlenecks become more than isolated moments. They form corridors of tension running through our genetic history. Each corridor suggests a narrowing so severe that entire variations disappeared permanently. We see only the lines that threaded through. The laboratory returns into focus. The rotating helix seems calm, but within it lie signatures of ancient vulnerability. Our genetic past is not a wide highway of abundance. It is a series of compressed passages through which survival barely passed. These compressions do not prove a hidden narrative. They reveal uncertainty. Large stretches of our early genetic history resist tidy explanation. We know narrowing occurred. We do not fully know why, and if our DNA preserves evidence of pressures we struggle to map onto known events. Perhaps the next clues do not rest in code alone. Perhaps they lie in the landscapes where those small fires once burned against impossible odds. The camera rises high above the continent of Africa. Coastlines sharpen. Deserts stretch outward, like pale oceans. Then faint lines appear across the landscape. Routes traced in soft light, following rivers, hugging shorelines, slipping through narrow corridors between mountains. These are not roads carved by cities. They are older than memory. For many years, the story of human migration seemed straightforward. A single wave left Africa roughly 60,000 years ago, carrying modern humans into new territories. They spread steadily across Eurasia, replacing earlier hominin populations, then eventually crossed into distant continents. It felt decisive, singular, complete, but the map now shows more than one line. Archaeological sites scattered across Arabia, the Levant, and parts of Asia suggest something earlier. Tools and fossil remains hint that small groups of modern humans may have ventured out of Africa tens of thousands of years before the traditionally accepted migration. These expansions were not massive. They were fragile. Some may have travelled during warm interglacial periods, when deserts softened and coastlines offered abundant resources. They moved along beaches rich with shellfish and fish, following currents and animal herds. The Earth opened brief windows of opportunity, and small bands stepped through them. Then climates shifted again. Ice advanced. Rain patterns altered. Rivers dried or flooded unpredictably. The environments that once supported fragile footholds withdrew their generosity. A group that had survived in a favourable climate might suddenly face conditions far harsher than those left behind. The record grows quiet. Fossils from these early expansions are scarce. Artifacts are scattered. Some sites show presence, then nothing. It is difficult to say whether populations retreated, merged into other groups, or vanished entirely. Yet the pattern suggests that departure from Africa was not a single triumphant march. It may have been attempted more than once. How many times did humanity leave home and never make it back? Animated lines on the map fade as quickly as they appear. One wave stabilizes and spreads. Others dim and disappear. The migrations that endured left descendants who continue the story. Those that failed left only faint marks, if any at all. History has a tendency to remember successes. Surviving lineages define the narrative, but the Earth does not preserve every attempt. Failed expansions may leave nothing but a thin scattering of stone tools, buried in shifting sand. Migration is often framed as bold and inevitable. Yet for ancient humans, each step beyond familiar territory carried risk layered upon risk. New predators, unknown climates, competition with other human groups already established. A few harsh winters could erase years of gradual adaptation. Seen from above, the spread of humanity across Earth resembles branching veins rather than a straight path. Some veins pulse and extend. Others narrow and end. It becomes possible to imagine entire human experiments unfolding in brief windows of stability. Small societies adapting to coastal abundance or forested valleys, only to dissolve when climate returned to severity. The migrations that shaped our present are those that survived long enough to anchor continuity. But beneath them lie attempts that ended quietly. If early expansions left little trace beyond scattered fragments, then vast chapters of movement may remain invisible. And if migrations vanished without clear record, then perhaps the environments themselves concealed more than bones and tools. Perhaps they concealed whole human beginnings beneath water and shifting land. The camera glides slowly along a modern coastline. Waves fold gently over sand, retreating and returning with patient rhythm. The horizon appears stable, permanent. Yet as the tide moves, a transparent overlay begins to peel back time. The sea withdraws, meter by meter, revealing land that no longer exists. During the height of the last ice age, vast quantities of water were locked inside towering glaciers. Sea levels stood more than 100 meters lower than they do today. Continents expanded outward. Coastlines shifted far beyond their present limits. What we now call islands were once connected by broad plains. Southeast Asia formed a massive landmass known today as Sunderland. Forests and river systems linked areas now separated by ocean. In the Persian Gulf region, a fertile basin likely stretched, where shallow water now rests. The North Sea, often grey and restless, once concealed Doggerland, a wide plain that connected Britain to mainland Europe. These were not desolate wastelands. They were ecologically rich corridors. Rivers braided through lowlands. Shorelines offered abundant shellfish and fish. Mild coastal climates softened extremes. For small human groups navigating a harsh ice age world, such regions would have felt inviting. It is easy to imagine communities forming near these ancient waters, camps established along riverbanks, fires lit beneath open skies, pathways worn between seasonal hunting grounds. If symbolic behavior emerged in coastal environments, if early networks of exchange or ritual practice developed near these fertile plains, their traces would not rest on dry ground today. Then the ice began to melt. No, all at once, not as a single catastrophe, but steadily across thousands of years. Glaciers thinned, meltwater surged into oceans, shorelines crept inland, swallowing valleys and encircling hills. Plains that once supported herds and human movement disappeared beneath rising waves. From the perspective of those living through it, the change would not have felt abstract. Year after year, familiar landmarks would vanish, forest edges would retreat, camps would need to move higher. Water would not only feed, it would claim. The process was gradual on geological timescales, yet relentless across generations. Entire territories were surrendered to the sea, and when water covers land deeply enough, preservation shifts beyond easy reach. Some of humanity's formative landscapes no longer appear on maps. They lie beneath fishing grounds and shipping lanes, beneath currents and sediment. Whatever stories unfolded there are hidden beneath layers of silt. What if our earliest chapters were written on land that no longer exists? The thought does not require legends of golden cities or monumental ruins. It requires only the recognition that human beings are drawn to water, and that water has reclaimed much of the terrain once favoured. Traditional archaeology focuses on dry land because it must. Excavation depends on access. Yet if critical developmental stages occurred on now submerged plains, then our surviving record tells only part of the story. The waves continue their quiet motion, indifferent to what rests below. And as the camera rises above the coastline once more, a subtle unease settles in. If entire habitable worlds are hidden beneath the sea, then perhaps the silence in our history is not emptiness at all, but distant. The sea fades, replaced by dry hills beneath a wide Anatolian sky. Rising from the earth are circles of stone pillars, tall and silent. They stand without mortar, without written inscriptions, without the familiar signs of cities. Yet they are older than the first farms. Göbekli Tepe unsettles the sequence most people learned. According to the traditional model, agriculture came first. Farming allowed surplus. Surplus allowed settlement. Settlement gave rise to plus, temples, organized ritual, and eventually cities. Civilization, as the story goes, followed crops. But here are massive carved pillars arranged in deliberate circles, erected more than 11,000 years ago by people who had not yet domesticated wheat or barley. They hunted. They gathered. They moved across landscapes that were still stabilizing after the last glacial period. And yet they shaped stone blocks weighing several tons, transporting and positioning them with coordination. That suggests planning beyond the immediate season. This does not prove a lost empire buried beneath sand. It proves something subtler. Hunter-gatherers were not simplistic. They possessed social organization capable of sustaining labor. Projects, ritual gathering could precede permanent settlement. Shared belief might have drawn dispersed groups together, long before walls enclosed them. The pillars carry carvings of animals, foxes, vultures, serpents, rendered with deliberate attention. They suggest symbolic systems already mature enough to inspire cooperation on a remarkable scale. Farming may not have created complexity. Complexity may have preceded farming. The thought shifts the ground beneath the narrative. Civilization is often defined by what survives in stone and brick. Cities leave ruins. Roads leave traces. Writing inscribed in clay endures. What if social sophistication flourished in ways that required no permanent structures? What if complex oral traditions, ritual networks, and seasonal assemblies connected groups across regions without the need for walls? Stone endures because it resists decay. But wood, woven materials, textiles, and spoken language dissolve. If an organized culture built with timber and fiber, if their most meaningful creations were ceremonial gatherings rather than fortifications, little would remain once centuries past. What we call civilization may reflect durability rather than origin. We see what resists erosion, and from that we infer beginnings. But beginnings may have occurred earlier, structured around shared identity and belief, rather than agriculture and bureaucracy. This does not demand lost skyscrapers beneath the sea. It suggests that erased chapters might consist of organized intelligence expressed in perishable forms. Networks of cooperation that left minimal archaeological footprints. Ritual systems that guided migration, encoded memory, and structured society without stone cities. What if intelligence organized itself long before agriculture and left almost nothing behind? The question lingers among the pillars as shadows lengthen across carved surfaces. The stones remain, but they hint at gatherings far larger than the site itself. Suggests fires, voices, songs rising into open air, long before permanent villages lined riverbanks. If early human groups achieved levels of coordination and symbolic depth beyond what we once assumed, then erased chapters may not represent technological collapse. They may represent cultural patterns that simply did not fossilize. And if such patterns existed on landscapes now submerged or reshaped, perhaps their memory did not vanish entirely. Perhaps it survived, carried forward, not in stone, but in story. The stone pillars fade into darkness, and the sound of wind gives way to the steady rhythm of water. Across continents and centuries, stories begin to surface. In ancient Mesopotamia, tablets of a great flood sent to cleanse the world. In early Near Eastern traditions, a righteous figure builds a vessel to survive rising waters. Far from these lands, cultures separated by oceans tell of deluges that swallowed fields and forests alike. The details vary. The names change, but the pattern repeats. For generations, such accounts were framed as allegory or spiritual metaphor. Some dismissed them as shared imagination. Others attempted to interpret them as literal global catastrophe. Yet between disbelief and exaggeration lies a quieter possibility. When the Ice Age ended, sea levels did not rise in a single dramatic surge. They advanced gradually, sometimes accelerating in sudden pulses as meltwater poured into oceans. To a coastal community living near the edge of a fertile plain, that rise would not have felt gradual. Year after year, the shoreline would move inland. Familiar camps would vanish. Burial grounds would slip beneath waves. Forest edges would retreat until trees stood in salt water. A generation watching its homeland disappear might describe the event in language shaped by awe and fear. The sea was not a charted concept. It was a living force. When it advanced, it felt intentional. Oral traditions have a peculiar strength. They simplify geography, but preserve emotional intensity. Memory condenses complex shifts into narratives strong enough to endure. A flood becomes the flood. A valley swallowed becomes the world remade. Researchers studying oral histories in Australia have found stories that align with rising sea levels from thousands of years ago. Landscapes described in legend match submerged coastlines revealed. By modern surveys, time stretches differently in spoken tradition, but it does not necessarily erase all detail. What if ancient flood stories are not fantasy, but memory? No, memory of a single planetary deluge, but of regional catastrophes witnessed across different shores. When Sunderland fragmented into islands, when Doggerland sank beneath the North Sea, when fertile basins in the Gulf were claimed by advancing tides. Entire communities would have faced loss on a scale that reshaped identity. Fire carries similar presence in ancient tales, stories of skies darkened, of ash falling like snow, of suns dimmed for seasons. Volcanic winters and abrupt climate shifts leave marks not only in ice cores, but in narrative imagination. Myths preserve emotional truth when precise measurement fades. They encode warning, transformation, and survival into forms that can cross generations. A flood myth does not require universal inundation to be meaningful. It requires displacement so profound that it demands explanation. If early symbolic cultures developed on coastal plains later lost to the sea, their final acts may not have been written in stone. They may have been spoken into memory. Stories carried inland, survivors who resettled higher ground. The camera drifts over calm water once more. Beneath its surface lie landscapes that shaped early humans. Above it drift stories that feel older than written history. Perhaps cultural memory is the last surviving trace of drowned chapters. No proof in the scientific sense, but resonance, fragments of landscapes that no longer appear on maps, preserved in tale and ritual. And if memory itself may preserve echoes of erased lands, then another question rises quietly beyond the shoreline. Do similar echoes exist, not only in myth, but within the structure of the human mind? The air inside the cavern is cool and unmoving. Torchlight trembles against stone, throwing shadows that seem to breathe along the curved walls. As the camera advances slowly, shapes emerge from darkness. A herd of horses racing in ochre and charcoal, a bison mid-charge, the outline of a hand pressed against rock, thousands of years ago. The silence feels deliberate, as if the cave is still holding something. These markings are more than decoration. They are signs that a mind once stood here and turned experience into symbol. To paint an animal is to separate it from the hunt, to hold its image still and reshape it in imagination. To leave a handprint is to say, without words, I was here. The gesture pushes thought outward beyond muscle and bone into the world itself. When humans carve or mark, memory shifts. It no longer relies solely on repetition within the brain. It settles into surfaces. It lingers in shared spaces. A cave wall becomes an archive. Thought acquires shape and endurance. Across continents, similar scenes appear. In Europe, southern Africa, parts of Asia, Animals are rendered with surprising attention to motion and proportion. Abstract symbols recur, lines crossing, dots clustered, shapes that resist simple explanation. The geographical separation is vast. The time differences are sometimes staggering, yet the impulse feels connected. This does not require a hidden global network linking distant caves. It suggests something quieter and perhaps more profound. A shared cognitive architecture. When human awareness reaches a certain threshold, it expresses itself in similar ways. The mind seeks pattern. It seeks representation. It seeks continuity beyond the moment. What if the first language of humanity was not spoken, but drawn in the dark? The paintings shift subtly in age. Some date back more than 40,000 years. Others are older than once believed. Yet symbolic traces do not appear evenly across time. In certain regions, artistry blossoms. In others, long stretches pass with little evidence. It flickers. That flicker carries weight. If symbolic behavior appears in fragments earlier than expected, then fades from view in some regions before resurfacing later, it suggests something fragile. Perhaps early communities developed symbolic systems that dissolved when populations shrank, when bottlenecks narrowed numbers drastically. Traditions may have fragmented. Knowledge requires continuity. If too many carriers vanish, even powerful ideas can fade. The cave walls whisper of both emergence and vulnerability. These paintings survived because stone protected them. Countless other expressions may have been carved into wood, shaped into woven forms, sung into night air, and vanished entirely. Symbolic thought may not have ignited once and spread unbroken. It may have surfaced in pockets, dimmed during harsh compressions, then reignited when conditions stabilized. Each resurgence building slightly upon what endured. The flickering torchlight feels like a metaphor without trying to be one. Awareness brightens, then softens, then brightens again. The cave preserves only those flames that lasted long enough to mark stone. And if art captured fragments of early awareness, preserving thought outside the body, then perhaps memory did not remain only within caves. Perhaps it travelled quietly within the mind itself. The cave walls fade into darkness, but the question they leave behind lingers. If thought once pressed itself into stone, could other traces of the past have travelled without leaving physical marks at all? The narration slows, turning toward a possibility that feels both intimate and unsettling. Do humans inherit more than genes? Biology passes traits through coded sequences, but culture moves differently. Stories repeat around fires. Ritual gestures become habit. Warnings are embedded in narrative rather than in molecules. Across generations, knowledge travels through imitation and language, shaping perception long before it is consciously examined. In parts of Australia, researchers have studied oral traditions describing coastlines that no longer exist. Some of these stories speak of land once stretching far beyond present shores. Geological evidence confirms that sea levels rose thousands of years ago, reshaping those very regions. The alignment is not perfect, but it is striking. Memory, carried through speech and ceremony, can endure far longer than we once assumed. This does not imply mystical inheritance. It suggests persistence. Communities pass down environmental awareness encoded in story form because survival depends on it. A flood becomes a tale. A drought becomes a warning. Over time, geography shifts, but the narrative retains its core emotional truth. Consider how certain human tendencies appear almost universal. Fear of darkness, fascination with fire, a tendency to scan the horizon, awe at the night sky. These reactions may feel instinctive. They may not correspond to specific memories, yet they echo ancient survival pressures repeated across countless generations. If early humans endured repeated near extinctions, volcanic winters, glacial advances, rising seas, even after the immediate threat passed, vigilance might persist. Ritual around fire might acquire sacred weight because flame once separated life from freezing death. What if fragments of forgotten worlds survive not in ruins, but in us? The erased chapter, archetypes that surface in myth across distant cultures, world-ending floods, cycles of destruction and renewal, ancestral wanderings under darkened skies. These stories resonate because they carry emotional truth, even if details blur over millennia. Memory does not need to be precise to influence behavior. It needs only to preserve enough intensity to guide action. A community displaced by rising waters carries a caution that shapes how it settles future shores. A lineage shaped by scarcity develops habits of cooperation or foresight that remain long after the crisis fades. The idea is not that we remember specific events from deep prehistory. It is that human psychology has been sculpted by repeated pressures. Each bottleneck, each migration, each environmental upheaval leaves subtle imprints on collective behavior. Over time, those imprints become normalized, woven into culture, and instinct alike. The flicker seen in cave art may have dimmed and reignited, but perhaps its residue survived in ritual and story, even when material traces disappeared. Symbolic thought does not vanish cleanly. It leaves echoes within how humans interpret danger, wonder, and belonging. If early awakenings rose and fell, their memory may not reside solely in artifacts, buried beneath soil or sea. It may persist in the narratives we repeat and the instincts we share. And if echoes of those awakenings remain alive within behavior and myth, then a deeper question presses forward. Could intelligence itself follow cycles beyond what we currently understand? The camera pulls back from caves and coastlines until continents fill the frame. Ice sheets advance in slow white silence, swallowing valleys. Then they retreat, releasing rivers that carve new paths. Forests spread across warming plains, only to wither when climates shift again. Species emerge, flourish for thousands of generations, and vanish as quietly as they began. Nothing on Earth moves in a single upward line. Growth meets constraint. Stability gives way to disruption. Systems accumulate complexity, then strain beneath it. Extinction is not an exception in this rhythm. It is part of it. Coral reefs expand and bleach. Rainforests thicken and burn. Evolution responds not with perfection, but with adaptation shaped by pressure. Within this wider pattern, human intelligence begins to look less isolated and more embedded. Cognitive leaps often coincide with instability. When environments tighten, minds sharpen. Cooperation deepens. Innovation accelerates. Then, when conditions soften, populations expand, carrying forward what stress refined. But catastrophe has a habit of interrupting momentum. If volcanic winters narrow populations to a few thousand, cultural memory shrinks with them. If migration corridors collapse under ice, communities fracture. In such moments, awareness does not vanish entirely. It contracts. Only fragments endure. Enough to survive, perhaps not enough to preserve everything that once was. What if consciousness is not a straight ascent, but a rhythm? The idea reshapes the erased chapter. It does not require a lost global empire buried beneath oceans. It does not demand hidden technology erased by conspiracy. It suggests something subtler. There may have been earlier cognitive peaks, communities where symbolic thought, planning, and shared meaning intensified, only to fade when populations compress too severely. A group, reduced to a few hundred survivors, may carry fire and language forward, yet lose certain traditions or structures that required larger numbers to sustain. Knowledge depends on continuity. If too many links break, even remarkable innovations can dissolve. Imagine awareness sharpening during hardship, then stabilizing during recovery, only to face another cycle of narrowing. Each rise builds upon remnants of the last. Each reset trims complexity, back to what is essential for survival. From a distance, the pattern resembles breathing, expansion, contraction, growth, compression. Modern humanity often sees itself as the pinnacle of a steady climb. But when placed against geological time, our present feels more like the latest crest in a recurring wave. Intelligence emerging, stabilizing, expanding, shaped again and again by environmental constraint. The erased chapter may not be a single, forgotten age of brilliance. It may be a series of moments when awareness reached toward greater complexity, only to be pulled back by forces beyond control. Those moments would leave faint traces in stone and none in soil, once populations thinned. and yet something always endured. Enough to begin again. If intelligence can sharpen under pressure and then narrow under catastrophe, then our current state may not be uniquely secure. We may be beneficiaries of a long sequence of rises and resets, each one pruning and reshaping what it means to be human. Ice advances and withdraws in cycles beyond any single lifetime. Within that rhythm, awareness flickers and strengthens. And if intelligence itself follows patterns of rise and contraction, then a deeper question waits beyond reflection. Are we the first technological species to reach this level of planetary transformation, or simply the first to remain unbroken long enough to remember? The camera lingers over a row of stone blades resting beneath museum light, edges chipped with deliberate precision, hand axes smooth by countless strikes, bone needles thin enough to pass through hide. These objects have survived because they resist time. They endure long after hands have vanished. Archaeology often begins here, with what remains solid. We measure intelligence through preserved artifacts. A sharper blade suggests planning. A needle implies clothing and preparation for cold. A spear point signals strategy. Stone becomes the language through which deep history speaks. But stone is only one material of many. What if early innovation relied on wood-shaped, carefully into tools that decayed within decades? What if woven baskets carried food and water across landscapes, then dissolved back into soil? What if shelters built from branch and fiber provided warmth and coordination but left no imprint once weather wore them down? The record privileges durability. Across the Pacific island, navigators once traveled vast distances without written maps or compasses. They read currents and star patterns, memorizing wave rhythms that cannot fossilize. Their knowledge existed in the mind, expressed through oral teaching and movement across open water. If such traditions vanished, what trace would remain? The same question stretches backward into deeper time. Early humans may have constructed frameworks of social coordination that required no permanent stone architecture. Meeting places defined by season, rather than structure. Exchange networks guided by story, rather than inscription. Sophisticated intelligence does not require monuments. It requires memory, planning, and shared understanding. None of these demand stone. Imagine a coastal community crafting canoes from hollowed trunks. Those vessels would enable movement and trade, yet wood immersed in salt water, and time leaves little behind. Imagine woven fish traps, intricate and effective. How much intelligence disappears simply because it was built from perishable matter. When we see no evidence of complex tools in certain layers, we often assume simplicity. But perhaps the tools were simply made of materials the earth does not keep. Perhaps early experimentation unfolded in forms we are not equipped to detect. Archaeological silence may reflect preservation limits, not absence of creativity. Entire systems of knowledge can flourish within organic materials and vanish entirely once continuity breaks. If a small population collapses, their techniques, songs, and craftsmanship can dissolve in a single generation. Stone tools feel tangible and reassuring. The more advanced the material science becomes, the more fragile it may appear across deep time. What if early human groups refined technologies we cannot recognize because their medium was too delicate to survive? What if social networks and ritual coordination preceded permanent architecture by millennia, leaving no durable signature? The museum glass reflects light across chipped stone. It is easy to equate preservation with progress, yet intelligence may have moved quietly through materials that resisted fossilization. If that is true, then our definition of advancement, built around what survives in rock, may be narrower than we assume. And if intelligence can thrive without leaving strong material traces, then perhaps what we call primitive deserves another look. The stone blades fade, and in their place stretches a wide horizon beneath shifting light. For centuries, progress has been measured by what rises above the ground. Towers, roads, walls, thick enough to outlast wind and rain. We associate advancement with weight and height, with the ability to leave marks on landscape that endure. But stone and steel may not be the only measures of intelligence. Long before cities hardened into brick and mortar, small groups crossed deserts, navigated coastlines, and survived in climates that would overwhelm the unprepared. Hunter-gatherer societies read patterns in the wind, the movement of herds, the flowering of specific plants. They understood seasonal rhythms with a precision that required no written record. Knowledge lived in observation and repetition, not in documents. Some could navigate vast territories, using stars as anchors, mapping the sky in memory. Others maintained intricate kinship networks stretching across regions, coordinating gatherings without permanent infrastructure. These systems were not accidental. They required planning, communication, and flexible thinking. Yet they left little that fossilizes. If advancement is defined only by metallurgy, monumental architecture, and surplus storage, then much of early humanity appears simple. But if advancement also includes ecological mastery and social cohesion, the picture shifts. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt to varied environments, may be as significant as constructing permanent walls. Early humans crossed mountain ranges without written maps. They survived extreme cold with tailored garments fashioned from hide and bone needles. They tracked animal migrations across seasons, anticipating movement with remarkable foresight. What if the greatest achievements of early humans were invisible to archaeology? The idea reframes, erased chapters. Perhaps what vanished were not cities of stone, but sophisticated mental frameworks, systems of thought, adapted precisely to fragile ecosystems. Astronomical awareness encoded in ritual and story, rather than carved in observatories. Social agreements maintained through shared memory, rather than inscribed law. Such cognitive structures could collapse swiftly if populations narrowed. A mental map of seasonal wetlands disappears when elders die without passing knowledge forward. An oral calendar of stars fades if the group fragments. No rubble remains to indicate what was lost. The absence of monuments does not equal absence of complexity. It reflects what materials were chosen to express it. Modern societies often equate progress with accumulation, more infrastructure, more visible output. Yet for most of human history, survival required mobility and subtle adaptation. To remain lightweight was a strength. To embed knowledge in the mind, rather than in stone, was efficient. Perhaps erased chapters were not mechanical peaks that rival our own. Perhaps they were cognitive peaks that flourished briefly under certain pressures, then dissolved when numbers thinned. The landscape stretches quietly beneath a pale sky. Yet beneath that silence could once have existed intricate webs of memory, navigation, and cooperation. If erased chapters were cognitive rather than industrial, then the most important transformations may have occurred inside skulls rather than on soil. And if intelligence has shifted its expression across time, perhaps what we call modern advancement is only one phase, which raises a final, unsettling thought. What if consciousness itself is still evolving? The camera lifts from ancient landscapes and submerged plains to a view of the modern world at night. Cities glow like constellations scattered across continents. Satellites glide silently above, tracing invisible arcs. Signals cross oceans in fractions of a second. In laboratories, genomes are edited. Algorithms learn from oceans of data. Machines assemble other machines. Compared to the span of human existence, this moment is almost weightless. Agriculture emerged only a few breaths ago on the scale of deep time. Industry followed in a blink. The digital age occupies less than a heartbeat. And yet, from within it, everything feels permanent. We often speak of evolution as though it has reached its conclusion with us, as if intelligence has arrived at its final shape. But when viewed against millions of years of climate fluctuation and population bottlenecks, this certainty begins to soften. Future species, whether biological descendants or something more hybrid, might one day examine our era as we examine Chet Stone. They may see our skyscrapers as transitional tools. They may regard our early artificial intelligence as crude prototypes. What we consider advanced may appear to them as foundational. If intelligence can surge, narrow, and reconfigure across cycles of pressure, then our present state may not represent culmination. It may represent a phase. What if we are not the culmination of evolution, but another transition? The idea does not diminish modern achievement. It contextualizes it. Every era feels definitive to those within it. Yet the fossil record reminds us that dominance can be temporary. Species that once ruled continents now exist, only in sediment layers. Humanity stands on the edge of capacities, once unimaginable. We reshape ecosystems intentionally. We manipulate genetic code. We extend awareness beyond the atmosphere, yet we remain bound to the same planetary dynamics that shaped our ancestors. Climate shifts continue. Resource constraints persist. Complex systems amplify vulnerability alongside strength. If intelligence has previously reached thresholds that collapsed under pressure, then our own expansion must be viewed with humility. No fear, but awareness. The erased chapter of evolution may not belong solely to distant ages. It may include futures not yet written. Evolution is not a ladder resting against the sky. It is an unfolding process sensitive to conditions. Intelligence, as one of its expressions, remains fluid. It adapts. It refines. It sometimes contracts before rising again. The glow of cities flickers softly beneath drifting clouds. From orbit, borders dissolve. Patterns remain. Weather systems, lights, currents of movement. We are beneficiaries of survived bottlenecks, successful migrations, cognitive sparks that endured long enough to accumulate memory. But nothing in the natural record guarantees permanence. Perhaps the most honest position is to recognize that we stand within a chapter still unfolding. No, at the end. No, at the beginning. Somewhere between. And if we are only midway through a larger cycle of emergence and reset, then another question waits patiently beyond the present glow. Were there moments in deep time when intelligence climbed higher than we imagine, and then quietly disappeared? The museum doors remain closed to the public. Fluorescent lights hum softly above rows of metal cabinets. In this storage room, history does not shout. It rests in drawers, labeled carefully, in faded ink. A curator slides one open, revealing a collection of stone tools arranged in neat rows, each tagged with a date and a site number. Most of these objects fit comfortably into established timelines. Hand axes aligned with known periods, blades matching expected techniques. But occasionally, something feels slightly out of place. A tool appears more refined than the layer beneath it should allow. A pattern of construction emerges in soil, dated earlier than the textbooks predict. These are not sensational relics pulled from rumor. They are real debates within archaeology. A site that reveals organized post holes where permanent settlement was thought absent. A structure whose dating overlaps awkwardly. A stone implement whose craftsmanship suggests a level of planning not expected for its assigned era. The narration remains steady. Dating methods are explained with care. Radiocarbon analysis measures decay in organic material. Stratigraphy reads the order of soil layers. Thermoluminescence estimates when stone was last heated. Each method carries margins of error. Contamination can distort results. Layers can shift due to natural processes. Science rarely overturns itself in dramatic declarations. It adjusts incrementally. When an anomaly appears, researchers first test the surrounding data. Could the layer have been disturbed? Could the sample have been misidentified? Often, revised interpretation restores the comfort of consistency. But occasionally, anomalies persist. They gather quietly across journals and conference presentations. No, enough to demand revolution, but enough to introduce tension. A cluster of dates slightly earlier than expected. A tool style emerging before the developmental sequence predicts. An isolated structure standing alone in time. What if the most important clues to our past are sitting in plain sight, labeled and catalogued, yet quietly debated rather than proclaimed? The temptation in some circles is to leap toward grand conclusions. Lost civilizations, hidden technologies, erased empires. But the quieter possibility is subtler and perhaps more unsettling. Patterns may shift without spectacle. If enough small contradictions accumulate, the narrative adjusts not through announcement, but through slow realignment. History is rarely rewritten with a single discovery. It bends as evidence gathers. An unexpected date here, a refined tool there. Eventually, what seemed premature becomes accepted as earlier development. The erased chapter of evolution may not consist of towering monuments buried beneath jungle. It may consist of distributed hints, refinements appearing before their time, cooperation emerging in pockets, earlier than widely acknowledged, anomalies handled carefully. Do not undermine science. They strengthen it. They expand the timeline gradually, integrating what once seemed misplaced. Yet they also remind us that the story of humanity is provisional, built from fragments, open to revision. As the drawer slides shut, the storage room returns to its quiet order. Nothing appears dramatic. No artifact glows with hidden power. Still, the tension remains. If these small irregularities accumulate, if tidy timelines face subtle pressure, then another possibility comes into view. Good environmental disasters have erased entire developmental stages, leaving behind only scattered traces, too faint to form a complete picture. The camera moves over a vast circular scar pressed into the desert. A meteor impact crater, so wide it can be seen from space. It drifts next across a silent volcanic caldera, its walls steep and ancient, then over a dried riverbed etched into stone where water once carved its path with relentless force. The Earth appears calm now, but its surface tells of sudden change. Planetary history is not gentle. Ice sheets once advanced across continents, grinding forests and valleys into powdered sediment. When they retreated, they reshaped rivers and coastlines beyond recognition. Tsunamis generated by undersea quakes would have swept across lowlands in towering walls of water. Supervolcanic eruptions blanketed entire regions in ash, thick enough to suffocate ecosystems. For fragile, early human populations, such forces would have been catastrophic beyond scale. Coastal settlements, likely attractive for food and trade, would be the first to vanish under storm surges or gradual sea rise. Inland habitats would shift abruptly as temperature and rainfall patterns changed. Herds would migrate differently. Familiar plants would fail to grow. Small clusters of survivors might scatter. A group once coordinated and stable could fragment into isolated bands. Knowledge preserved through routine and repetition might thin quickly if elders were lost. Complex traditions require continuity. Catastrophe disrupts it, yet the Earth does not always preserve the violence it unleashes. Over millennia, erosion softens the edges of impact sites. Vegetation conceals old ash layers. Rivers deposit new sediment across landscapes once occupied. Tectonic motion tilts and fractures crust, burying earlier surfaces beneath layers of rock. What was once a lived in plain becomes ocean floor. What was once a thriving valley becomes desert. How many human experiments has the Earth quietly erased without leaving a visible scar? It is tempting to imagine catastrophe as dramatic and obvious, a permanent wound etched into terrain. But often, geological processes overwrite evidence with astonishing efficiency. A wooden settlement near a riverbank disappears within decades if abandoned. A mud-brick structure dissolves beneath rain and silt. Even stone can fracture and scatter under glacial pressure. If early advanced behavior existed only in limited pockets, perhaps along vulnerable coasts or fertile lowlands, its traces could vanish almost entirely when those landscapes shifted. Survivors moving into new environments would prioritize immediate adaptation over preserving intricate social frameworks. Complexity might narrow into essential knowledge needed for survival. What remains after such events would be sparse, scattered tools displaced from original context, isolated bones without clear cultural association, fragments that hint but do not confirm. The fossil and archaeological records reflect what endured through this ongoing editing. They do not capture every experiment undertaken by our ancestors. They capture what survived the rewriting. And rewriting has been constant. Ice advances and retreats. Rivers flood and alter course. Ash settles and becomes soil. Landscapes are not static archives. They are dynamic canvases, continually revised. If catastrophe can erase material culture so thoroughly that only faint traces remain, then perhaps the most enduring signs of erased chapters do not lie in stone structures or buried artifacts. Perhaps they endure in patterns repeated across generations, in behavior shaped by cycles too powerful to ignore. The camera rises again, leaving craters and riverbeds behind. It drifts across continents and centuries, pausing at distant points on the timeline. In one region, cave walls bloom with painted animals, deep within European stone chambers. In another, pieces of ochre, engraved with deliberate patterns, emerge from African soil far older than once expected. Elsewhere, ritual burials appear across Asia, bodies arranged with care and intention. These events are separated by geography and time. There is no evidence of a single network linking them all. Yet, the pattern feels familiar. Symbolic behavior ignites in different places, under different skies. Were these isolated breakthroughs, independent strokes of creative genius? Or were they responses to shared pressures, similar thresholds crossed in parallel? The narration does not drift toward hidden empires or unified ancient civilizations. Instead, it suggests something quieter. Intelligence may respond predictably to certain conditions. When population density reaches a level that allows ideas to circulate widely, cognition deepens. When environmental stress tightens survival margins, cooperation sharpens. When communication expands beyond basic exchange, abstraction flourishes. Under these converging pressures, symbolic thought intensifies. But if populations fragment again, through climate shifts, migration failure, or catastrophe, that intensity may fade. A small group can survive physically while losing layers of accumulated complexity. If too few remain to sustain rituals or specialized skills, awareness narrows back toward essentials. This cycle would not produce a single, forgotten golden age. It would produce multiple partial awakenings, communities reaching cognitive thresholds briefly, then losing continuity before cumulative technology could anchor progress. What if humanity has awakened before? And each time, the awakening did not last. Rather than imagining one lost advanced species overshadowed by myth, consider repeated peaks of awareness rising and falling beneath environmental pressure. Each peak building upon remnants of previous attempts, each reset trimming complexity to what survival permits. Cave art flickers into existence, then recedes. Ritual burial spreads, then thins. Engraved symbols appear in one region, disappear in another. It is less a singular explosion than a pulse that travels unevenly across human populations. From a distance, the pattern resembles breath. Expansion of symbolic depth when stability allows, contraction when numbers decline. The fossil record captures those moments, when expression endured long enough to leave stone behind. It cannot record the many sparks that fail to stabilize. If intelligence requires continuity to accumulate, then perhaps we are living in the first stretch long enough to avoid interruption. Agriculture anchored communities. Writing externalized memory beyond individual minds. Technology layered knowledge across generations, without relying solely on oral transmission. Earlier awakenings may have lacked these stabilizing structures. When bottlenecks struck, their sparks dimmed before becoming self-sustaining. The earth turns slowly beneath shifting climate bands. Ice retreats. Forests grow. Human awareness expands once more. For now, it has not yet contracted. If awakening itself may recur, shaped by cycles of pressure and fragmentation, then the question deepens in a new direction. Does our current trajectory follow the same arc as those earlier peaks? Or have we crossed a threshold that finally breaks the pattern? The night side of the planet glows softly. From orbit, cities form constellations across continents, webs of light stitched together by invisible lines. Satellites drift above in silent arcs, blinking faintly as they relay signals across oceans. Beneath them, aircraft trace narrow paths through darkened skies. Data moves faster than thought, crossing cables laid along the seafloor, weaving the world into a single continuous network. From this height, human civilization looks seamless. On the ground, complexity hides in plain sight. A single smartphone depends on minerals mined from one continent, assembled on another, shipped through narrow straits, and processed through ports, guided by digital tracking systems. Electricity flows from distant turbines to urban neighborhoods, regulated by algorithms few people ever see. Food arrives at markets, through supply chains, stretching across climate zones, timed with precision. Unlike early symbolic cultures, which thrive through small networks bound by shared memory, our civilization is layered and interdependent. Financial systems rely on digital communication. Digital systems rely on stable energy grids. Energy grids depend on resource extraction and transportation. Each layer rests upon another, forming a structure that appears solid because it functions smoothly. Tightly coupled systems amplify possibility. Innovation accelerates when information travels instantly. Medical breakthroughs spread rapidly across continents. Knowledge accumulates at a pace unimaginable to earlier generations. Complexity, in this sense, becomes an engine. But tightly coupled systems also amplify vulnerability. A disruption in one region can ripple outward in surprising ways. A blocked canal slows global trade. A regional blackout disrupts networks beyond its borders. A cyber attack reverberates through interconnected infrastructure. These are not catastrophes in the geological sense. Yet they reveal the sensitivity woven into modern design. The tone remains calm, not alarmist. Complexity is neither good nor bad. It is simply dense. Dense systems can accomplish extraordinary feats. They also require stability to maintain balance. When considering earlier cognitive peaks, it becomes possible that fragility played a role in their contraction. Small populations reliant on oral continuity and localized networks may have struggled to withstand environmental shocks. A prolonged drought, a volcanic winter, a migration failure could narrow numbers quickly enough to fragment accumulated knowledge. Modern humanity possesses tools those ancestors did not: written records, digital archives, global communication. Yet our scale introduces new pressures. Population size is unprecedented. Environmental impact is planetary. Interdependence stretches across the globe. If intelligence once flickered and faded under shifting climate and resource strain, what makes us certain this time is different? The lights of cities shimmer beneath drifting clouds. They feel permanent from within, yet from orbit they appear as delicate as constellations. Patterns dependent on countless unseen connections. The erased chapters of the past no longer seem distant mysteries. They begin to resemble cautionary rhythms. Complexity can elevate awareness to extraordinary heights. It can also magnify strain. If our civilization mirrors the patterns of rise and fragility glimpsed across deep time, then studying erased chapters becomes more than historical curiosity. It becomes reflection. The planet turns slowly beneath satellite eyes. Storm systems spiral across oceans, tracked in real time. Forest cover is measured from orbit. Ice sheets are monitored down to subtle variations in thickness. For the first time in its history, intelligence does not simply experience the world. It observes it systematically. Written language once extended memory beyond the limits of a single mind. Printing multiplied it. Digital storage expanded it beyond anything earlier civilizations could have imagined. Today, libraries exist not only in stone buildings, but in servers buried beneath mountains and under Arctic ice. Knowledge travels instantly, duplicated across continents. Earlier cognitive peaks relied heavily on oral continuity. If a small population fragmented, tradition could vanish within a generation. No, redundancy has expanded. Ideas are backed up. Data is mirrored. Archives are scattered. Yet permanence is not guaranteed. Digital memory depends on energy. Servers require cooling. Software must be maintained and translated across changing systems. A power grid failure can silence vast repositories. Cyber conflict can erase records silently. Physical libraries decay when neglected. Even space-based archives, though promising, remain limited compared to the scale of global memory. The difference may not be immortality, but probability. Knowledge today is more resilient, yet still vulnerable. It spreads quickly, yet can be disrupted quickly as well. What sets this moment apart is something subtler. Humanity now studies its own fragility. Ice cores are drilled to reveal past climates. Genetic bottlenecks are reconstructed from DNA. Mass extinctions are analyzed in detail. We are aware that chapters can be erased. Are we the first generation to know that chapters can be erased, while still having the power to protect them? Self-awareness extends beyond individual survival into collective foresight. We build seed vaults in frozen vaults. We archive data beneath bedrock. We attempt to store human knowledge in long-lasting mediums, anticipating possible disruption. We debate sustainability, resilience, and interdependence in ways previous civilizations did not. It reframes it. Earlier peaks of intelligence may not have known the extent of environmental cycles shaping their fate. They responded reactively. We model future scenarios. We attempt to predict. Hope here does not arise from certainty. It emerges from consciousness recognizing its position within a larger pattern. We can see evidence of past resets, etched into sediment and encoded in genomes. That recognition introduces choice. Still, awareness alone is not protection. Complex systems remain sensitive. Climate continues to shift. Political and economic networks strain under scale. Knowledge may be duplicated, but duplication does not equal immunity. The skyline glows faintly at dusk. Screens illuminate faces across continents. In countless rooms, conversations unfold about preservation, adaptation, and responsibility. If earlier awakenings faded because they lacked continuity and foresight, then this era holds a distinction. Intelligence now contemplates its own survival as an evolutionary phenomenon. That contemplation carries weight. It is fragile, yet unprecedented. If awareness is indeed our distinguishing trait, then the final question cannot be avoided. Are erased chapters warnings, or simply part of a rhythm far older than intention? The planet turns beneath a field of stars. From orbit, continents drift slowly, almost imperceptibly, across deep time. Clouds curl in broad spirals. Weather systems rise and dissolve, without regard for borders. The Earth appears patient, vast, and untroubled by the stories unfolding on its surface. Against that scale, human history becomes a brief shimmer of light. The erased chapters we have traced through fossils, genomes, and submerged plains now gather into a single question. Are they warnings of fragility, or simply expressions of a larger rhythm? Did earlier awakenings represent failures to avoid, or natural oscillations within a dynamic system? Perhaps intelligence is not meant to ascend endlessly. Perhaps it experiments. It gathers complexity until pressure tests its limits. It contracts. Then it reorganizes, emerging again in altered form. Ice advances. Ice retreats. Awareness sharpens. Awareness narrows. The pattern could be as intrinsic as the turning of seasons, or perhaps something has changed. For the first time, consciousness studies its own trajectory. We recognize bottlenecks in our DNA. We measure climate cycles in ice cores. We map extinction patterns in sediment. This awareness introduces a variable no previous species possessed. Reflection. The idea rests quietly rather than dramatically. The erased chapter of evolution may not be a single hidden epoch waiting to be uncovered. It may be an ongoing pattern, visible only from a distance. A repeating arc of expansion and contraction, shaping intelligence across planetary time. Standing at this moment, humanity occupies a pivot point. The systems we have built can amplify creativity or accelerate collapse. The awareness we possess can guide adaptation or remain merely observational. We can drift through rhythm unconsciously, as countless species have done before us, or we can attempt to alter it deliberately. Will we become another lost chapter, or the first that chooses not to disappear? The question does not arrive with panic. It settles like dusk across a quiet landscape. Civilization continues to glow below, humming with activity. Life goes on, yet beneath routine, a deeper awareness lingers. Previous awakenings may have lacked the capacity to anticipate their own narrowing. They reacted to shifts, without seeing the pattern behind them. We, however, stand with glimpses of that larger arc. Whether those glimpses will translate into durable resilience remains unknown. From orbit, no single era appears permanent. Continents reshape. Species come and go. Intelligence itself may rise and fade across epochs. And yet, this moment feels different. No, because it guarantees survival, but because it recognizes possibility. The pattern of erased awakenings no longer lies hidden in sediment and myth. It stands before us as reflection, with that pattern laid out across deep time. The story moves toward synthesis. If erased chapters form part of a broader rhythm, then the next step is to ask whether evolution itself carries direction, and what responsibility conscious intelligence now holds within that unfolding story. The sky stretches without boundary. Stars burn in quiet suspension, their light travelling across distances too vast for immediate comprehension. Beneath them, the earth turns unnoticed. The narration slows, almost to a whisper. After tracing fossils in sediment, code in DNA, drowned landscapes, and recurring awakenings, the question shifts. No, what happened? But why? Does evolution carry direction? No, intention in the human sense. No, a plan drawn in advance. But trajectory. When certain conditions arise, does life tend toward greater complexity? And when complexity crosses a threshold, does awareness inevitably follow? Biology does not speak in purpose. It speaks in adaptation, yet patterns repeat. Eyes evolved independently in multiple lineages, not once, but many times. Wings emerged in insects, birds and mammals, through entirely separate paths. Complex nervous systems formed wherever environmental pressures. Convergent evolution shows that when similar problems arise, similar solutions appear. Could intelligence be one of those solutions? If awareness provides advantage in unstable environments, enabling prediction, cooperation, and strategy, then it may not be an accident in the purest sense. It may arise wherever conditions favor flexible behavior over rigid specialization. Under this view, consciousness becomes less mysterious and more emergent, a property that surfaces when matter organizes itself beyond certain thresholds. Is consciousness a cosmic accident, or something the universe keeps trying to build? The thought feels expansive without becoming mystical. Chemistry follows physical laws. Molecules assemble under conditions shaped by gravity and energy. Life appears where stability allows it. Complexity increases where pressure demands it. Awareness may be a byproduct of sustained complexity interacting with unpredictability. On Earth, intelligence has taken different forms. Cephalopods demonstrate problem-solving skills and environmental adaptation. Primates develop social intricacy and tool use. Cetaceans navigate vast oceans with advanced communication. Human cognition is one expression among many. If intelligence repeatedly surfaces in varied forms, then perhaps awareness is not an anomaly balanced on improbability. It may be an attractor, a state toward which biological systems drift when opportunity permits. No, guaranteed, but favored under certain conditions. Under this lens, erased chapters of evolution change meaning. They are not deviations from a destined path. Moments when complexity approached awareness, or when awareness deepened, but failed to stabilize under environmental strain. Evolution does not abandon intelligence when it fades. It tries again where conditions allow. The night sky remains vast, indifferent yet steady. Stars ignite and collapse, cosmic time. Galaxies merge and drift apart. Within this scale, life on Earth is fragile, yet persistent. If awareness is an attractor rather than an exception, then our presence here does not represent a singular miracle. It represents continuity through pressure and opportunity. The erased chapters begin to look less like tragic interruptions and more like part of an unfolding pattern. Complexity rising, narrowing, rising again. And if intelligence may be a natural trajectory under certain conditions, then the deeper question emerges quietly. Are we witnessing direction, or only the illusion of it formed by our own perspective within the pattern? Transparent panels stand upright in a dim room, each etched with a timeline. From a distance, the lines appear clean and direct, stretching from distant past to modern present. The camera moves closer. The straight lines begin to split. Branches extend outward, some thinning, others thickening. Some end abruptly, fading into nothing. The human mind prefers simple trajectories. We imagine history as ascent, from primitive beginnings to enlightened complexity. It comforts us to believe that progress moves forward like an arrow. But evolution does not move that way. It branches, contracts, experiments, and diverges. At many points in deep time, multiple human lineages coexisted. Neanderthals thrived in colder regions. Denisovans adapted to high altitudes. Other hominin species, now known only through fragments, once occupied territories overlapping with early Homo sapiens. They were not stepping stones, they were contemporaries. Survival does not select for superiority. It selects for adaptability within specific conditions. A lineage flourishes when it matches its environment well enough to reproduce. When conditions shift, that advantage may disappear overnight. Traits that once ensured dominance become liabilities under new pressures. The branching lines on glass grow more intricate. Some branches show remarkable innovation, tool use, social complexity, symbolic behavior. Yet innovation alone does not guarantee continuity. A group may reach cognitive thresholds, develop abstract thought, organize communal rituals, and still vanish if environmental volatility compresses their population beyond recovery. The erased chapters may represent such branches. No, failed, because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked stability long enough to accumulate and preserve it. A cognitive peak without resilience can disappear without leaving descendants to carry it forward. What if survival, not superiority, is the only reason we are here to tell the story? The thought humbles without diminishing. Modern humans often view themselves as the most advanced outcome of evolution, yet perhaps our defining characteristic is continuity. We happen to endure a series of bottlenecks that thinned other lineages beyond return. We maintain networks wide enough, flexible enough, to sustain cumulative memory. Continuity requires more than brilliance. It requires redundancy, cooperation, and adaptability. It demands resilience across fluctuating climate and shifting terrain. Intelligence may flare in many forms, but unless it can persist across disruption, it resets. The straight line dissolves entirely now, replaced by a web of paths. Some extend briefly, then end. Others wind and reconnect. The present appears not as a pinnacle, but as one thread still unbroken. Hierarchy fades under this view. We are not necessarily the highest expression of awareness that Earth has seen. We are the branch that remained long enough to write its history. If continuity defines us more than superiority, then the focus shifts away from how intelligent we have become toward how durable that intelligence truly is. And if our presence depends on sustained continuity, the next question becomes unavoidable. What does continuity require, and do we possess enough of it to endure? The timelines fade, and the focus turns inward once more. No, to caves or fossils, but to screens filled with genetic sequences, climate graphs, and simulation models that project futures not yet lived. Humanity has crossed a strange threshold. Intelligence is no longer merely adapting to condition. It is studying the forces that shaped it. We decode our own genome, tracing lineages through bottlenecks and migrations. We drill into ice sheets to measure past atmospheres. We calculate extinction probabilities and track biodiversity decline in real time. The species that once struggled to survive sudden winters now predicts warming decades in advance. There is something unprecedented in this moment. Evolution has produced a form of life capable of recognizing its own fragility. Awareness introduces choice. Earlier cognitive peaks, if they rose and fell, may not have known the arc they were part of. They experienced hardship and recovery without understanding the broader pattern. They adapted without perceiving the scale of geological rhythm. We do not have that excuse. We monitor planetary boundaries, mapping thresholds beyond which systems destabilize. We analyze past collapses in ecosystems and civilizations. We speak openly about vulnerability, about resilience, about sustainability. The erased chapter no longer feels like distant mystery. It feels like reflection. For the first time, evolution understands itself. What happens when awareness enters the cycle? The question carries quiet weight. Intelligence alone may not be the defining threshold. Many species exhibit forms of problem-solving and adaptation. But reflexive intelligence, the ability to observe one's own trajectory and potentially alter it, may be different. If consciousness can recognize patterns of rise and reset, it gains the possibility of intervention. That does not guarantee success. Prediction does not equal control. Yet foresight changes the dynamic. Awareness transforms repetition into choice. The capacity to foresee decline introduces responsibility. If climate destabilizes through human activity, we cannot attribute it solely to natural fluctuation. If complexity collapses due to neglect or imbalance, it is no longer an unseen rhythm. It becomes consequence. The Earth continues to turn. Storms gather and dissolve. Species adapt or vanish, as they always have. But one species now contemplates whether it can interrupt the cycle rather than merely endure it. Perhaps this is the true leap. Not the first use of fire, not the first carved symbol, but the recognition of fragility combined with the ability to respond deliberately. Reflexive intelligence may represent a new layer in evolution's unfolding. The capacity to ask not only how to survive today, but how to persist across epochs. The erased chapter thus shifts from curiosity to caution. It is no longer only about what was lost. It becomes a mirror reflecting what could be lost again. With direction and responsibility laid bare, the story approaches its final movement. What, ultimately, does the erased chapter represent? Absence, warning, or something more? The camera lowers gently from orbit to the surface of the Earth. Grass moves in a quiet breeze. Soil lies undisturbed beneath it. Far below, layers of sediment rest in darkness, holding impressions of lives long gone, beneath cities, beneath forests, beneath ocean floors. There is a depth that does not speak easily. The story returns to where it began, to silence. We have moved through fossil gaps where only fragments remain, through genetic bottlenecks that narrowed humanity to thin strands of survival, across drowned coastlines that once held fertile plains, through recurring awakenings where symbolic thought flickered, dimmed, and rose again. None of these alone confirm a hidden golden age. None demand lost towers beneath the sea or machines buried in stone. Yet together they reveal something undeniable. The record of evolution is incomplete. No, false. No, deceptive. But partial. It is shaped by preservation, by continuity, by the accidents of survival. The erased chapter does not require vanished skyscrapers or secret technologies. It may consist of early sparks of cognition that fail to endure. Small groups experimenting with abstraction, ritual, coordination. Their traditions dissolved when numbers thinned, moments when awareness sharpened under pressure, then retreated as catastrophe, narrowed the carriers of memory. Intelligence could have surfaced more than once before stabilizing into today's uninterrupted arc. It may have gathered briefly in pockets along vanished shorelines or within fragile networks scattered by climate shifts. Those attempts would leave little if they did not survive long enough to build redundancy. The soil beneath our feet contains countless stories erased. Most species that have lived are gone. Most variations within species have faded. The same principle applies to cognition. Ideas require continuity. Without it, they vanish as quietly as footprints in rain. What if the erased chapter is not a secret civilization, but forgotten attempts at being us? The thought reframes the entire journey. Instead of searching for monumental ruins hidden by oceans, we recognize the fragility of emergence itself. Becoming conscious, building shared meaning, sustaining cumulative knowledge, these are delicate achievements. They can be interrupted. They can reset. Modern humanity stands on a foundation shaped by survived compressions. We inherit the continuity of those who endured long enough to pass knowledge forward without rupture. That does not make us inevitable. It makes us fortunate. The silence beneath our feet is not empty. It is layered with possibilities that never stabilized. Branches that grew briefly and ended. Cognitive peaks that never reached the momentum required to persist across upheaval. Evolution appears orderly in textbooks because only surviving threads are visible. The vanished threads lie folded beneath soil and water, inaccessible, not because they were insignificant, but because they did not continue. If erased chapters are forgotten attempts at being us, then the mystery becomes less about what we missed and more about what we carry forward. And that shifts the focus quietly inward. How? Will this attempt unfold? The camera rests on a narrow bridge stretching across a quiet gorge. Beneath it flows a river that has carved its path for millions of years. The image lingers, then softens into the present. Modern humanity stands suspended between deep past and unknown future, balanced on a continuity that feels sturdy from within yet fragile when viewed against time. Behind us lie genetic bottlenecks survived, symbolic awakenings sustained, migrations that endured long enough to anchor memory. Ahead lies uncertainty, shaped by climate, technology, and choice. This moment gathers layers of achievement, once separated by vast eras. Biological survival, abstract thought, and planetary-scale engineering now coexist within a single generation. Unlike earlier peaks, we archive, we analyze, we anticipate. Data accumulates in servers and vaults. Patterns of past collapse are studied with rigor. We do not merely experience pressure, we attempt to model it. And yet fragility remains woven through complexity. Climate systems shift with or without consent. Oceans warm, forests thin, weather intensifies. Technological interdependence means a disturbance in one region reverberates across networks. Intelligence has expanded its reach, but expansion does not erase vulnerability. Power alone has never guaranteed permanence. Dominant species in earlier epochs vanished when conditions altered beyond their tolerance. Overspecialization can feel like mastery until circumstances change. Evolution consistently rewards those able to adapt rather than those able to dominate. The erased chapters whisper this lesson quietly. Perhaps brilliance alone is insufficient. Perhaps survival across cycles depends more on flexibility than on magnitude. A smaller, adaptable network may endure where a rigid, powerful one fractures. Is the future shaped by how powerful we become, or how adaptable we remain? The question reframes permanence itself. Continuity is not forged from strength alone. It arises from balance, from humility in the face of shifting systems, from recognizing when to expand and when to recalibrate. Modern humanity has gained unprecedented influence over its environment. Yet influence without restraint can accelerate instability. Awareness without action can become complacency. The bridge holds because it distributes weight and bends under stress. A structure that refuses to flex cracks. If erased chapters teach anything, it may be that intelligence survives, not by reaching the highest peak, but by adjusting before collapse. Resilience often hides in modest changes rather than dramatic leaps. We stand within a fragile continuity, one capable of preserving memory across centuries, yet sensitive to miscalculation. The archive is vast, but its survival depends on choices unfolding now. Adaptability is not passive. It requires foresight, cooperation, and willingness to change course when evidence demands it. Evolution favors those who respond to pressure creatively rather than defensively. The river beneath the bridge flows steadily onward. It has witnessed countless rises and falls without preference. Humanity occupies one span within that longer current. If adaptability determines whether this continuity persists, then the final uncertainty cannot be avoided. What, in the end, are we becoming? Dawn gathers slowly at the curve of the Earth. From orbit, light spills across oceans and mountains in gradual waves, turning night into muted gold. Cities dim as the sun rises. Clouds burn softly at their edges. The planet rotates without urgency, carrying everything forward, whether noticed or not. The narration softens until it almost disappears into the hum of the morning. Perhaps intelligence is not a finished achievement resting at the peak of evolution. Perhaps it is still unfolding, still experimenting through matter and memory. For billions of years, atoms assembled into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into minds capable of reflection. That trajectory feels improbable and inevitable at once. If earlier awakenings rose and faded, maybe they were not failures, but rehearsals. Early drafts written under harsher conditions, attempts at stabilizing awareness that lacked the continuity required to persist. Through repetition and compression, intelligence refined itself until it reached a state capable of archiving its own past. Or perhaps this is projection. Humans seek pattern as instinctively as breath. We connect points across silence and infer direction where only coincidence may exist. The erased chapters we have traced might be nothing more than fragments shaped by chance, interpreted through the lens of our own need for meaning. The film does not declare certainty. It allows the possibility of randomness to coexist with the possibility of rhythm. Still, something remains undeniable. We are both the archive and the author. Our genes carry ancestral endurance. Our libraries and networks preserve accumulated thought. Yet, what survives from this moment onward depends on choices unfolding in real time. The erased chapter is not confined to deep sediment or drowned plains. It extends ahead. Each generation writes into continuity or fracture. Each decision either reinforces resilience or tests it beyond recovery. Will future beings look back at us as the ones who endured, or as another forgotten spark? The question carries no accusation. It carries weight. Intelligence now perceives itself within a larger story. Whether that perception alters the arc remains uncertain. As sunlight spreads across the globe, shadows retreat. The same planet that witnessed ice ages and migrations now hosts satellites and digital signals. Consciousness observes itself observing. Perhaps the awakening continues, deepening beyond what we can currently imagine. Or perhaps it narrows again under pressures still gathering. The pattern has never promised permanence. And yet, standing at this threshold, there is a quiet awareness that something new is present. The ability to reflect before reacting, to adapt deliberately rather than instinctively. The dawn brightens, oceans shimmer, continents glow in morning light. The screen fades to silence. Not as an ending, but as an open page.